Good morning from Helsinki once again. I got this inspiration yesterday to go back to the great Swedish poet Tomas Tranströmer. I had no idea when I started this poetry series that I was going to constantly go back to Tranströmer. But I've kind of rediscovered him in the process of hiking and thinking, meditation, and my own personal transformation. So it is what it is. And through Bly's translations, it really sticks nicely in your soul. Some of these lines where there's this where you're at first you're just led to believe like it's just description, it's just kind of like fancy, interesting wordplay, but then you realize that his poems really can't, even the longer ones can't really be reduced. They're not mechanistic. They're not ones and zeros. It's they're set in a way where they build and they build and they take you to a place where it's like you rediscover something in the world or in yourself. And that brings me to one of the recurring themes, something that inspired Tranströmer, the poet, throughout his life. He has many quotes where he talks about it. Labyrinths. I'm talking about labyrinths. That wonderful word that no one really knows the origin of. You know, it's been around for so long. You know, it obviously is some Greek or Proto-Greek, but nobody really knows where it's from exactly and what it really referred to, originally when it was first uttered. You know, some people think it's kind of like the double axe, which is a symbol that you'll see in Minoan culture on coins and such. Some people think it just means just some kind of word that means pathway or some corridor or something like that, kind of something mundane. But I think for Tranströmer, it was more about this idea of self-discovery, but also that time is nonlinear. And he loved that idea. And a lot of his best poems, without being in any way pretentious, it's in certain parts of them, you can see these spots of time, as the author Norman Maclean might say, or as Wordsworth might say, the depth in one moment. And through the accumulation of images, sometimes very disparate images that he brings together, you get that sense. And I like the way he takes you through like the different parts of the brain, from like the id parts, like the survival, and then the community love part. One part, the reptilian brain that's just always concerned about security, survival, and then in our modern context, because so many of those natural enemies or worries are not real, it's the paranoia. And then in his poetry, you're always, in some ways, you're shifting to what different cultures call like the meditative or the third brain. And it's kind of interesting, like Bly talked about this, is about how, we use this fancy word meditation, to try and get to this higher consciousness. But really, it's sitting and understanding the chaos of your own mind, and not trying to do anything, not trying to be all namaste and all this kind of stuff, this kind of like sloganeering that sometimes you see in these like spiritual kitsch culture, spiritual kitsch culture. So it's more getting to know the self. It's getting to know, being in touch with the great mysteries, the wild spiritual ideas, but not owning it, not putting it into a 30-second commercial. And being in the presence of that flow. And I think that's what Tranströmer was always aiming for, and he definitely achieved in many of his best poems, is that the presence of the flow state of the mind, which some would say is the highest. But you're always flipping between the different modes. I was out hiking, and I almost slipped down. There are all these big exposed boulders and rocks, from how the landscape was rearranged at the end of the last ice age, and I almost really not bought it, but had a bad fall. I almost had a really, really bad slip and fall, but all of a sudden it just shocked into that other state of mind, and then all of a sudden you place your hands and the feet in just the right way, in just the right moment, and everything's calm again. You're fine. So anyway, let's read this this poem, of course, translated by Robert Bly. Navigating this confusing world. This is called Out in the Open. We're starting in the deep woods. Late autumn labyrinth. On the porch of the woods. A thrown away bottle. Go in. Woods are silent abandoned houses this time of year. Just a few sounds now. As if someone were moving things around carefully with a pincers. Or as if an iron hinge were whining feebly inside a thick trunk. Frost had breathed on the mushrooms, and they have shriveled up. They look like objects and clothing left behind by people who've disappeared. The dusk is coming already. The thing to do now is to get out and find the landmarks again. The rusty machine out in the field, and the house on the other side of the lake. A reddish square, intense as a bouillon cube. A letter from America drove me out again, started me walking through the luminous June night in the empty suburban streets, among newborn districts without memories, cool as blueprints. Letter in my pocket. You wild, raging, walking, you area kind of prayer for others. Over thee, evil and good actually have faces. With us, the most part, it's a fright between roots, numbers, shades of life. The people who do death's errands don't shy from daylight. They rule from glass offices. They mill about in the bright sun. They lean forward over a table and throw a look to the side. Far off, I found myself standing in front of one of the new buildings. Many windows flowed together there into a single window. The luminous night sky was caught in it, and the walking trees. It was a mirror, like lake with no waves, turned on edge in the summer night. Sun burning, the plane comes in low, throwing a shadow shaped like a giant cross that rushes over the ground. A man sitting in the field poking at something. The shadow arrives. For a fraction of a second, he is right in the center of the cross. I have seen the cross hanging in the cool church vaults. At times, it resembles a split-second shot of something moving at tremendous speed. That is just an absolutely lovely image. In some ways, really surprising, shocking when you first read it, and you can picture yourself in that space. And of a plane flying low enough, like you see it, and then there's enough of a shadow, and then the man in the poem is in the center of the cross. It's an amazing image. It brings me back to, I remember one time I was in my single digits somewhere, I don't know, 7 years old, and in the summer, seeing the silver plane. It must have been American Airlines, their old design, and I don't know. It was just a passenger plane, but it was flying low enough. It was maybe we were living, I guess, probably 50 miles from the airport that it was headed to, and I remember seeing it up in the sky, and it was one of the first times that I really contemplated flying. And I've carried that image with me forever. And now that I've been on thousands of airplanes and traveled all over the world, at that time I had barely ever been on a plane, and it was still a grand mystery to me. And that's, I'm just like waxing into my own little joyful, blissful memories. But the larger point is that that's what you often find in his poetry, and especially this one, is this. He starts in the deep woods. It's very, very contemplative. He's in the mystery, he's in the labyrinth, or just starting the labyrinth. And then later in the poem, he brings in, this conflict, big conflict with what we've made of this world, with the technology, the building, the predetermined routes that we stick ourselves in, the office towers, like as, what's his name? Neruda would rail about, walking through these dull, stupid landscapes that we've created and trapped ourselves in. But it also reminded me, like when he's talking about find myself standing in front of one of the new buildings. Many windows flowed together there into a single window. But then he contrasts the luminous night sky was caught in it, and the walking trees. It was a mirror-like lake with no waves, turned on edge in the summer night. And then he's talking about, before that, then he's talking about the new districts without memories, cool as blueprints. And that reminded me of, this is also, I guess I was a little bit older, and I was in my early 20s. And I remember I was living for a short time, it's a long story, near a very, very new development in kind of a fancy suburb of Minneapolis. But they had constructed, I don't know, it was like these 4 office towers. Well, they were not office towers, but kind of like fancy suburban office buildings. They were maybe like 6 stories each, kind of identical. Actually, nice design. They spent some money on it. This was not just a quick value engineered job. They had some distinction to them. Architecturally, I'm not going to overstate that, but they weren't ugly at all. But they were in this part of town that I don't know what was there before, but it was just some kind of wasteland. Like there weren't any old trees. They'd planted a bunch of trees, and they had created these little, ponds, reservoirs, artificial lakes, kind of, and then the buildings were around them, and there was a nice pathway around there, so I would take all these walks through there, but the buildings weren't in use yet. They were just about to be finished, and it was a weird landscape because it was all brand new. Everything was planned. Everything felt artificial, but again, somebody put some time and care into the design, the architecture of the buildings, and the landscaping. and such, but it had no memories, as he says in the poem. Absolutely no memories. It was just, blueprints. They were trying to create something from nothing, and something nice. There are probably some, established businesses where people make, decent money and drive nice cars. But, but on the other hand, it was like barren. It was just like, it was Nothingsville. So I was like, I remember distinctly just having all of these cascading thoughts as I would walk through this landscape, of this kind of like office development that was yet to be used, that had no history, and it's kind of like an interplay. Like you can find in any suburb of any big city in America, you can find just the ugliest, dumbest landscapes where everything's just cheaply built, thrown together. It's all about making a quick buck. But then, I'm thinking about this place where it was so weird. It was, in some ways, it felt like being on a movie set, because these buildings hadn't been used yet, and you'd rarely see anybody around, but they were like within months of being occupied, I think. And they were still like doing some finishing touches on the interiors, I think, and such like that, and the landscaping. But it was kind of like a neat experience to feel that this wasteland was transformed, not into something great and inspiring, but still almost like the best you can do with what you have in this in this world where the culture has just been eroded to such a degree, where very few people are thinking on these higher levels and making things and living day to day in a beautiful, humane way. Now I'm really going off the rails, but I'm going to try and redeem myself, because I've only gone 17 minutes. And what I like about reading Tomas Tranströmer's poetry is that it's a profound departure from what most of us are thinking about minute to minute on an ordinary day, but it's not so far out. It's like he's a great guide. He's a great spiritual guide, because it's just kind of like these labyrinths that he was talking about. These labyrinths that are all over Sweden, that are hundreds of years old. The Trojaborg labyrinths that I think played into a lot of his inspiration. This idea of nonlinear time, self-discovery, and the harmony. You're not being tricked. You are led along this path. But you realize these kind of like profound, surprising, wild ideas, but they're set in a form that we can easily manage and understand, and easily accept. But yet, when we start navigating into it, these much more esoteric, wider perspective ideas start coming in. So I'm going to read this again, and I'm going to do a better job. I made 2 mistakes, and I was going to redo the whole thing, but I decided to leave it in, because I think that's the great thing. It's like when you're playing music or poetry, or just engaging with these beautiful, clever ideas. It's okay to make a mistake, and like someone once said that like a great piano piece, even like a mediocre player who makes a few mistakes, or gets a note wrong, or the rhythm wrong, or just isn't really in tune with what the composer had in mind, it's okay, because it still leads you somewhere. It still leads you to a heightened state of consciousness, and it's good to be in that process of learning. Like, so many people are afraid to learn because they're so concerned about being right about everything, or having the correct answer, and that's not. I just don't think that that's what life is about. Anyway, let's read this again and see if we get another sense, and then a lovely ending image with the plane and the guy walking on the grass, and how the shadow hits. Late autumn labyrinth. On the porch of the woods, a thrown-away bottle. Go in. Woods are silent, abandoned houses this time of year. Just a few sounds now, as if someone were moving things around carefully with pincers, or as if an iron hinge were whining feebly inside a thick trunk. Frost had breathed on the mushrooms, and they have shriveled up. They look like objects and clothing left behind by people who've disappeared. The dusk is coming already. The thing to do now is to get out and find the landmarks again, the rusty machines out in the field, and the house on the other side of the lake, a reddish square, intense as a bouillon cube. A letter from America drove me out again, started me walking through the luminous June night in the empty suburban streets, among newborn districts without memories, cool as blueprints. Letter in my pocket. You wild, raging, walking, you are a kind of prayer for others. Over their evil and good actually have faces. With us, for the most part, it's a fight between roots, numbers, shades of light. The people who do death's errands don't shy from daylight. They rule from glass offices. They mill about in the bright sun. They lean forward over a table and throw a look to the side. Far off, I found myself standing in front of one of the new buildings. Many windows flowed together there into a single window. The luminous night sky was caught in it, and the walking trees. It was a mirror-like lake with no waves, turned on edge in the summer night. Sun burning, the plane comes in low, throwing a shadow shaped like a giant cross that rushes over the ground. A man sitting in the field, poking at something. The shadow arrives. For a fraction of a second, he is right in the center of the cross. I have seen the cross hanging in the cool church vaults. At times, it resembles a split-second shot of something moving at tremendous speed. So that was, again, I did a slightly better job that time. Tomas Tranströmer, Out in the Open, translated by Robert Bly. Two great poets from the 20th century who had a great correspondence together. I believe some small press or university press published their correspondence. They called it airmail. But they both had very interesting poems of plane imagery, and I think Robert actually got the one from Tranströmer, where he talks about there's no solution for the fact that this giant jumbo jet 747 can fly up there with its fragile wings, something like that. But anyway, getting back that labyrinth imagery, he just mentions it once, of course. But then if you look at the form and the structure and these a lot of his poems are these concentric circles where he's then sticking to that moment and getting deep, deep, deep within just one single moment. Then I'm thinking about all the stone labyrinths all over Sweden, hundreds and hundreds of them from hundreds and hundreds of years old, the Trojaborg, Trojaborg, labyrinths, and so that simple structure, ancient idea, still has tremendous relevance for us today if we just want to dive in, take a look, see what's there. Those are a little bit of thoughts. Wow, I was doing so good on this video, and then I say something that makes me sound stupid. But anyway, I hope you have a tremendously insightful day, and enjoy your journey, whether it be a family journey, a journey of solitude, of work, of play, of discovery, and we will talk again further on down the trail. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.